The University of Johannesburg, the future reimagined.
I'd like to welcome Prof. Kezia Batitsai and Dr. Alexander Rusero, who would be presenting today. I wonder, do they have what's it called? PowerPoint presentations? Okay. Prof. Kezia, I wonder if you'd like to start your presentation on gender equality in the Fourth Industrial Revolution era, views of information and communication technology, male workers in Gauteng.
Thank you very much for this wonderful opportunity to speak to you about gender inequality and ICTs. And I have to make a disclaimer at the very beginning of the presentation because, as you can see from the order of the presenters, I'm actually number 2. So we co-authored this together with our student, our master's student, and she's actually in hospital. She was admitted a day before yesterday, and I've not heard from her since then. So that's the disclaimer that I thought I should share with you because she was the main author. It's based on an MA studies. So the study is really about exploring gender inequality in the 4IR, and we are exploring the views of male workers in Gauteng. And what inspired this study is the question of the gender digital gap within the ICTs. And you find that women have been excluded and efforts have been made in different contexts to try and rope in women through different innovations. For example, in South Africa, the STEM program that allows women to to acquire qualifications that prepare them for ICTs and other technological related qualifications or careers. But you find that there is still this divide and there's still this gap when it comes to the place of women in ICTs. So this is really something that we thought it would be interesting to explore. And one would wonder why then look at male workers' views when you're trying to address gender inequality in the sector. Why not listen to women's narratives, women's experiences? And we thought this is something that is obvious if we are to explore women's views and women's experiences. From a conceptual point of view, this is sort of obvious because we know the gender inequalities that characterize, technological-driven sectors or careers. So we thought, why not then look at men and listen to their views and understand it from the male perspective? What are their thoughts given the patriarchal arrangements that characterize, these gender inequalities? So we went against the norm and tried to look at male workers and their views of inequality from a gender perspective. And this is something that is also inspired by gender framings within our context. If you look at UN Women, for example, it says leaving no one behind. So if we are to understand the gender inequalities that characterize different sectors of our lives, you find that the solution doesn't lie in one gender, but rather roping in all the genders so that at least we get to understand how different genders conceptualize these inequalities and the possible way forward in terms of addressing the inequalities. So basically that's what inspired this, study in trying to understand it from the male perspective and also exploring those in the ICT context specifically. But as you notice from the presentation, you realize that we had to narrow down the study to Gauteng. Why? Because this is merely out of convenience and nothing else. So focus is on Gauteng because that's where we are located. So in terms of access, we have access to ICT companies within the Gauteng context, and also even our student can explore the different companies within the Gauteng region. Because it's just a master's study, we encourage you not to be too ambitious and explore different provinces, given that it's just a minor dissertation as opposed to a full dissertation without coursework. So that's the logic behind Gauteng. And also in terms of the central argument, we are saying that gender inequality in the ICT sector in the era of the 4IR can only be achieved, gender equality, sorry, can only be achieved when there's equal access to existing and emerging technologies and equal opportunities between men and women. Why is this important for us to emphasize existing and emerging? Because if you look at existing technologies, you know, and you realize, if you don't know, that actually women have very limited access to technologies. And if we are to take this to the home environment, you would find that literature reveals that for some homes, there are certain gadgets. This is empirical evidence. So there are some gadgets that are, you know, preserved for men. So they are not really open for, you know, equal use across the genders. So there are patriarchal arrangements that shape access to these technologies within and beyond the home setup. So that's why we wanted to know what are the issues around existing technologies and also in terms of emerging technologies, especially in light of the 4IR, which some would argue we are not yet there, but we are actually getting into that zone where we can talk the language of 4IR and how it's impacting access to technology. So it's really about ensuring gender inequality with respect to equal access to existing and emerging technologies. So if we are looking at emerging technologies, what measures have been put in place to try and allow women access to these technologies instead of, you know, operating in a context where access is framed according to that which we are problematizing, that which has created a digital divide across the genders. So we are saying whatever technological advancement is explored, let's try and incorporate, you know, both genders so that at least from the word go, women have access to these new technologies that prepare them for this, you know, work that is located within an ever-evolving context of technology. And also, the other argument is that male ICT workers in South Africa should play a central role in the creation of an enabling environment that encourages women's participation in the sector as the country embraces the 4IR and its realities. And this takes us back to the central, you know, conceptual argument that if we are to look at women alone, then we are missing the point, because what is the role of men in trying to address this gender divide when it comes to digital, you know, technology? We are arguing that male workers themselves should play a central role. So this is why we are saying their views and their perceptions when it comes to gender inequalities that characterize ICTs are very important, and they are very central to, you know, the creation of an enabling environment that encourages, but not only encourages, but also empowers women when it comes to technology in our context. But over and above these arguments, I think we need to emphasize the issue of patriarchy and how it perpetuates these gender inequalities within the home and beyond. Why is this important in a context where we are saying society is evolving, we're embracing new technology, we are saying there's something that starts at home that is perpetuated even in the working environment. So that something is patriarchy. We need to deal with the patriarchal arrangements that sort of even inform the choices of, you know, the career choices that are made by children, where women, as in some families or some societies, pushed towards, you know, women-oriented or women-perceived careers. So as we address this gender, digital divide rather, from a gender perspective, let's start at the bottom. Let's address the root causes of women's technological illiteracy in South Africa and other similar contexts, so that at least we narrow down the digital divide in our context. And in a nutshell, I think that will really summarize the key arguments that Regina would have loved to articulate and share with the audience when it comes to the gender inequalities that characterize the 4IR and the way forward when it comes to embracing technology and narrowing the digital divide that we witness on a daily basis. Thank you very much.
Kezia. We're going to take questions and comments after the presentations. I will go to Dr. Ricero next. He's from the University of Johannesburg. His paper is entitled Unpacking the Digital Dividend and Digital Divide of Big Data in Africa, the Case of Zimbabwe. Dr. Ricero?
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Doc, for the opportunity. By the way, you look lovely in that outfit. My name is Alex Rusero. I am with the Institute for Pan-African Thought and Conversation as one of the 10 Lethema visiting fellows. So for the past 2 months, I have been in South Africa, but I had to sneak out day before yesterday to fix issues of my days on the passport. So again, just like the previous presenter, the prof, this was a core effort with a colleague. He's still a master's student back in Zimbabwe, and is a keen interest in data-related issues. That's why I had to rope him in, but he couldn't unfortunately join due to pressing commitments. His name is Nyasha Makiwa. So I'm going to present on a topic entitled Unpacking the Digital Dividend and Digital Divide of Big Data in Africa, specifically looking at Zimbabwe as our case study. So when you are looking at issues of data for the past 2 days, the thrust of this conference on technology and society has been one, aimed at animating our capabilities, our intellectual faculties in the juggernaut of the fourth industrial revolution, which is on our way, which we cannot avoid, which is inevitable in the social, political, economic, technological, and cultural realms of our lives. But there is one fundamental fact that is also an inescapable reality, that the much hype on the fourth industrial revolution and the cause for us to embrace it tend to blur the grim picture of big data, notably the extent to which the society can be characterized by the haves and the have-nots. I am glad Prof. Kezia actually highlighted the gender dimensions. It's actually a gender extension of my presentation, the extent at which the digital divide can negatively impact in the society in as much as gender dynamics, gender-related issues are concerned. But I'm going to look at it as a whole, because you would find out that in the context of the field that we are all coming from, the field of higher education, the aspects of data, the aspects of a fourth industrial revolution are regurgitating or reminiscing issues to do with the bottleneck system, which was a key feature of the colonial apparatus in the 19th century, as well as the latter half of the 20th century, where the Africans were subjugated to a certain ceiling in as much as how they could progress educationally was concerned. That's why the highest you could go as an African maybe was a lawyer, if you were lucky, but mostly doctor, nurses, etc. Africans were placed at the peripheries of the real professions that matter and real professions that would exhibit their fullest potential. That was the bottleneck system. Now this bottleneck system is back in other names, in other cosmologies, and in this case, we can actually locate the rejuvenation of the bottleneck system through the concept of fourth industrial revolution in general, or if you want issues to do with big data. That's primarily our argument. So from the decolonial lens. I come from the decolonial school. So from the decolonial school, I am going to expose the coloniality of data in the notions that we are speaking about, the notions of our fourth industrial revolution, the notions of the digital dividend and the digital divide. At the heart process of it all is the notions of what I would want to characterize as the coloniality of data. So we may start by defining digital dividends, and there is no definition that is more appealing than the one that has been postulated by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, which defines the digital divide as the gap between individuals, households, businesses, and geographic areas at different socio-economic levels about both their opportunities to access information communication technologies and to their use of the internet for a wide variety of activities. So we are looking at the gap. We are looking at a wider gap, the huge discrepancy that exists between and amongst individuals, households, businesses, geographies, certain confined localities, etc. In as much as the use, in as much as the ownership, in as much as the access to the information and communication technologies are concerned. So this has been amplified by the United Nations Deputy Secretary General Amina Mohammed, who claims that the digital divide can be explained as the inequalities between the digital haves and the have-nots in terms of their access to the internet and the ICTs. So we shall continue to witness the miseries of the proletariat, the miseries of the peasants in the digital divide, in the digital realms, where some have, some do not have, hence the term, the digital have-nots, and as well as the digital haves. But perhaps it would animate this discussion to expose this gap through nuancing my analysis on the population dynamics in Zimbabwe. So as of January 2022, this has been the official population, which is pegged at 15.21 million, with women constituting the bigger chunk, constituting 52.3%, and men constituting 47.7%. So this is a further illustration carrying on from what Prof. Kezia said earlier on. So if you look at this gender discrepancy, the irony is that as much as women are many than men in Zimbabwe in general, and the generality of Africa in particular, the realities are that women tend to be marginalized more than men in as much as issues of accessing data, issues of accessing ICTs are concerned, because the divide cascade not only in terms of the status in the society, but also in terms of gender itself. And I must also put a disclaimer that the genderized dynamics in Zimbabwe, in as much as issues of population are concerned, are still only categorized in binary in terms of you are either woman, or you are either men. That's the current scenario. So if you then go down according to the age, breaking down this population in age dynamics, you would find that 0 to 4 years constitute 13.1%. We might slightly exclude this, as well as the 5 to 12 years, we might exclude it. But if you look from 13 to 17 years, 18 to 24 years, 25 to 34, 35 to 44, 45 to 54. This is the digitally active group in the society. And the digitally active group in the society is still characterized by issues of the haves and the have-nots, which we can even cascade down to gender, to issues of women are accessing the ICTs and big data less than their male counterparts. So let's look at the issues of our internet users in Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe is still pretty much on the peripheries in as much as embracing issues of ICTs and issues of digital proliferation technologies are concerned. So you have, by January 2022, only 4.65 million were the users of the internet against the reality of a population of above 15 million. So what it means is that in terms of the internet penetration rate, Zimbabwe is somewhere around 30.6%, with the 10.56 million, that is 69.4% of the entire population being offline. So this is a grimy picture already, in as much as where do we then locate issues of embracing the fourth industrial revolution when we still have this huge gap, so to speak. So we can even go further by looking at the social media statistics in Zimbabwe, because social media has been a forceful platform, especially in the current context of the post-Anthropocene, which the world defines itself in. This is where the interactions are actually taking place, real interactions in real time in their virtual spheres, in their virtual formats. So you have only 1.55 million users of social media. Remember, these users could also be multiple users. You are the same person with a Facebook handle, the same person with Instagram, etc. So Facebook remains the largest pooler with 1.3 million, followed by LinkedIn, which has got 680,000, followed by Facebook Messenger, which has got 288.5 thousand, followed by Twitter, which has got 232,000. So in spite of all the noises that we see on Facebook, on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook Messenger, and LinkedIn, especially in Zimbabwe in terms of the political discourse, the effect of the matter is that the discourses that are being churned out, without necessarily downplaying the efficacy of social media, they are kind of elitist and at the peripheries because of the rate of usage, a tiny rate of only 1.5 million users out of a population of about 16 million. So it's a grimy, pathetic picture in as much as embracing the fourth industrial revolution is concerned, in as much as actually leveling up, promoting issues of equality, issues of access, issues of empowerment, because ICTs, they also talk to issues of empowerment. But where do we locate the agency of empowerment in a scenario where only 1.5 million are actually digital citizens, the so-called netizens? Then I will move on to my theoretical framework, which from the onset I said I am looking at it from a decolonial lens. So the decolonial lens actually suspiciously views data as the coloniality of data. And this kind of framework is premised on the works of the likes of Evaristo Benyera, the likes of Monica Halcott, Nick Cowdery, Ulysses Ali Mejias, to mention but a few, who postulated the notions of coloniality of data. The key argument sustained in the coloniality of data is that just as the yesteryear century of colonization, the colonial process, which successively subjugated the African continent through plunder, enslavement, and pilferage, the contemporary form is being animated by data, which is ensuring the dispossession of Africa from their social resources through data mining and harvesting. Isn't it ironic that in the 21st century, human beings are now being forced to behave like machines, and machines are now behaving like human beings, such that a whole computer gadget will ask you, prove that you are a human being, you are not a robot. Can you click? How many mountains do you see? So it's the artificial intelligence now that has got a mistrust to the real human intelligence, so to speak. So in terms of gaining more access, Zimbabwe and Africa, the rest of Africa, we are not in charge of the content that we produce. You have a whole setup of a big brother approach. It's ironic that the major investment company which owns Facebook does not create content, does not employ content creators, but it sells content. It is the biggest producer of content that it does not create. You go even to the automobile industry. Uber does not even own one motor vehicle, but it has got the biggest mobile taxi service in the world. So this is where the world is going, but this world is more exploitative than where we are coming from. Because at the end of the day, the net cost of all this is dispossession of the Africa from his or her social resources through the imperial global northeast activities of data mining and data harvesting. So the big colonial brother is still watching even your activities. So we may lie to ourselves that I have my Facebook account, my Twitter account, my Instagram, but the truth of the matter is that we do not own these platforms. They are not ours, but the owners of these platforms, who in essence should be us, are not us, such that it's a parasitic relationship. The parasite dictates and controls what the host, how the host should do, behave, act, and react. I have a friend in my previous background. I once worked in the newsroom. So we were Googling about Osama bin Laden, just being fascinated about Osama bin Laden. And it took us about 4 hours mining about Osama bin Laden. Then from nowhere, a suspicious email, not even on the site we were Googling, an email into our accounts popped in. Can you tell us, why is it you have this keen interest on Osama bin Laden? This was coming from Pentagon, I recall. So it becomes very scary because there is this invisible hand, which even as we falsely think we own these platforms, they wanted to dictate what you should actually churn out and what you should not churn out. If you are found to be in direct contrast of the establishment, you were struck off. This happened to Donald Trump on Twitter, by the way. This has happened to a lot of people who have been barred from their accounts accessing their platforms and their handles. So that's the coloniality of our data notion, where the applications, the platforms, the smart objects, they capture and translate our lives into data and then extract information that is fed into capitalist enterprises and sold back to us. So we are actually purchasing data which would have been, which in essence is us converted into applications and platforms and smart objects. You look at TikTok, for example, it's us who feed content to that. But for you to access, you need utility, you need certain data costs, etc. So we may want to ask, therefore, what needs to be done? From my introduction, I said I am a Letema visiting research fellow with the Institute for Pan-African Thought and Conversation. So I propose a Letema approach to deal with the coloniality of data, because the truth of the matter is we cannot do away with it. This is inevitable, but we should seek to find ways of harnessing, ways of actually coexisting, cohabiting with the fourth industrial revolution in certain ways that convert the divide into dividends. And the Letsema decolonial approach is that such kind of an approach. Letsema means collectively and voluntarily coming together for a common good, for a common purpose. So in other words, it is only through voluntarily coming together as a people, as states, as the whole continent, for the common good that we can harness, embrace, and convert the current realities of the divide into the dividend. So let's say each and every African cultural background has got a certain letsema of some sort in their own language. From Zim in Shona, we call this Nimbe, where a whole community would come voluntarily work, harvest the fields, we will slaughter goats or a beast together, eat it for a week, harvesting the field, collectively putting our labor, and we can do rounds, we do it to the next homestead, etc. So that at the end of the day, labor is actually accorded voluntarily and freely for the common good and the progress of the society. So it's Nimbe, if we are to locate it in Zimbabwe, in Basotho, it's Letsema. The Japanese, they also have their own way, which they call Kadzukoro. They also have a similar concept, meaning there is something common about the human value, an instinctive idea of collectively coming together. So how do we do so, coming together in the context of a fourth industrial revolution and in the context of big data, so as to convert the digital divide into digital dividend? I think the higher learning institutions which we hail from, they are actually the lowest hanging fruit. Thankfully in South Africa, that they have managed to do that in some sort. But the whole idea is that the onus is upon us as human beings to strategize how to use the egalitarian principles of resource sharing and data sharing. So in the context of the 21st century and in the approach of Letsema, it's not about ownership of platforms that should matter, but what should matter is a humanistic approach that emphasizes access and sharing of knowledge and data more than it does on ownership, which is the current approach. Because the moment we locate an owner, already we have a caste system, we have the haves and the have-nots, we have stratified. But if we devise mechanisms of accessing, of sharing the resource of data and fourth industrial revolution, that's a common humanistic approach of Letsema. So big data could actually be a useful entry towards breaking down the epistemic silos currently existing in some parts of Africa's higher education systems. It shouldn't be an issue for a student or lecturer or professor at the University of Johannesburg to access the data repository of Stellenbosch, of Cape Town, of University of South Africa, of University of Pretoria. The whole idea is just to break the silos. One database can actually be shared, can actually be cross-pollinated, so that you make a virtual tour, a digital virtual tour of accessing resources from one institution or another, breaking down the barriers of distance, breaking down the barriers of access, breaking down the barriers of sharing. When that happens, we would have created an ecology of knowledge system which can only be harnessed through cross-sharing, cross-pollination, multiple access, and multiple sharing of data across the divide. I am about to finish, Madam Convener. So a Letsema approach is aimed at breaking the big data divide in higher education. And this is done predicated on a humanistic approach. In terms of this humanistic approach, the assumption is that a humanistic pedagogy is the ultimate panacea in confronting legacies of colonialism and ongoing legacies of coloniality, whose principal outcome is the dehumanization of Africans. We can only rehumanize ourselves, remember ourselves within the ecology of knowledge system through sharing and through equal access to resources. So smart technologies, they have a certain ways of doing it. Smart technologies, they allow for what is called data scraping in the information communication technology industry. And that data scraping results in what is called legal deposit in a cloud storage system. Now, when the things are in a cloud storage system, this would then enable access and managing data analytics, thereby harnessing cross-sharing platforms of artificial intelligence systems, especially when sharing and access have been enhanced. So the cloud storage system would break the barriers and create one storage facility where each and every one of us can share, can access information without necessarily considering issues of who is the owner of this information, who would then enable me to access or not to access big data. So there is our conclusion. In the context of the fourth industrial revolution, technology and society, as well as the advent of big data, the primary intention from a colonial perspective has never been one aimed at making Africa prosper. We underwent through the process of slavery, subjugation, dehumanization, which was repackaged again and come back as colonization, colonialism, which was legitimated by the illegal Berlin Colonial Conference of 1884 to 1885. Then this ended with the juridical independence, premeditated independence by the colonialists, which simply replaced their national anthems with ours, their flags with ours, white administrators with black administrators, fine. But we are now in the current era of coloniality, where the colonial master has realized it doesn't make sense for him to be physically present, physically occupying us. This can be done remotely through a lot of mechanisms put in place, deliberately designed to perpetuate the colonial system that currently exists. That's coloniality. So in the context of fourth industrial revolution, technology in the society, these we can also view suspiciously as instruments aimed at perpetuating coloniality. But we can convert those instruments, those swords of colonialism, into plowshares or dividends that can actually be harnessed in Africa. And this can only be done by breaking the sharp divide of data inequality, the data haves and data have-nots. And this can only be done if higher education institutions are prepared to break this barrier by working together in the quest of creating open access to data and information and breaking silos of data monopoly, access, and storage. I thank you. I will stop here for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lucero. There's a lot to think about. Before we go to the audience for Q&A, I just wanted to find out if one of the other speakers has come online. Has anybody else come online? Okay, perfect. So we'll open the floor. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Sorry, we have a gentleman over here who has a question.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. My name is Ronald Munatz, and I'm a doctoral scholar with the Africa Center for Evidence. Thank you very much, Dr. Lucero, for that illustrious presentation. I really liked the part on trying to strengthen research and knowledge systems to enable access and sharing of data And you obviously talked about the colonial, nature of the current system, how it has been affected by the colonial legacy. There's so much talk, obviously, on decolonizing some of the research and knowledge systems. I'm not really against the decoloniality agenda, but there's been a tendency of people, talking about colonialism, the legacy the left by colonialists and how it has disadvantaged us. And there's so much talk and talk and talk, but usually if we are asked what if we have to do to change this as Africans, there's very little that is being offered in that respect. Your presentation seemed to have focused on access and sharing, but there are a lot of other capacity gaps as well that are existing. That may not necessarily be as a result of the colonial legacy, and we've got a lot that we can do as Africans to change this. So I'm wondering if maybe in your presentation you can shed more on what we can do, especially at individual and institutional level, even the systemic level, in terms of capacities, to ensure that in terms of strengthening capacities, that is, to ensure effective and sustainable access, including utilization of data and knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Banda?
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. As Odia said, my name is Dr. Njabulo Banda. I'm a postdoctoral research fellow at the Institute for Pan-African Thoughts and Conversation, IPATC. I have just two comments, I think, for both the speakers. So the first comment is for Prof. Kezia. So Prof. Kezia, I mean, obviously, we love the whole angle about the, gender perspectives. And also, I think I particularly enjoyed that your study also focused on the opinions from the male counterparts. I just wanted to find out, in terms of the inequality, because what I kept on hearing was issues of access, and I think you were saying access to existing and emerging technologies. So I was wondering if there's a little bit more other aspects in terms of inequality, things maybe like policy or training, capacity building, that will also facilitate or help, the women to be, on the same level as their male counterparts when it comes to accessing, because it's one thing to access, or maybe in your research you unpack exactly what you mean by access. And then obviously, like I'm saying, what other facilitating sort of topics come into your mind when you think about the inequality. Yeah. So I just need a bit of clarity there. And then for Dr. Rusero, I think as well, in terms of the decoloniality, it's quite an interesting angle, I think, especially at the end when you were talking about how being colonized might not include someone being physically there, but still being colonized with someone who's not even in the vicinity. But I think all the time whilst you were presenting, what I was thinking about is that the argument that we do not own data, I'm not too sure if you've been following the conference, but there's been a lot about that that's been said about data being owned elsewhere in the headquarters. We don't have access, or we don't have ownership. And so I'm wondering how in your research you are singling out this to the decoloniality part, because it seems like the rest of the world, like for example, the platforms you're mentioning, Facebook, LinkedIn, and all those, everybody else does not own that data. And so what makes you focus so much on the decoloniality aspect, and how do you justify that to only apply to the African countries, whereas it could very well apply to everybody else? And then in terms of the and I really particularly enjoyed your analysis of the usership, I think, of the internet and social media in Zimbabwe. That was quite interesting. Thank you.
Any more questions before I send it back to the speakers? Okay, no more questions. Prof. Batisai and Dr. Rosero, would you like to answer the questions posed to you?
Thank you very much for the question about issues of access. And when we make reference to access, we are not limiting access in terms of, or rather reducing access in terms of, having access to technology, but rather we are saying at the bottom of these inequalities are issues of access. And with access, we are talking about access to opportunities, access to the technology itself, and access to, environments that are enabling, in the sense that they allow women to be empowered and to acquire the much needed skills when it comes to technological development. And then also in terms of other factors, yes, you are right on saying that, because if you look at South Africa, for example, it's celebrated as one of the countries with, the most progressive, constitution. But you find that there is a mismatch between what the constitution says and the reality on the ground. So if we were to talk about access, independent of institutional arrangements that shape the everyday, then we are missing the mark. In a sense, we need to explore the policy frameworks that govern issues of access, that govern issues of, opportunities that are, tabled. So to what extent can policy really address the gender inequalities and allow women equal access to, opportunities and these technological platforms? So really the question of policy is also important. And you find that when it comes to implementation, we often struggle, and I will not limit this argument to technological issues only, but rather look at gender inequalities across the board. You would find that even in the context of gender-based violence, we have excellent policies, excellent frameworks, but really when it comes to implementation, we are found wanting there. So the issue of policy is quite important, because once we come up with policies that allow women, to be empowered, to be, encouraged, then we are really starting to have a meaningful conversation. But we are reducing this issue of gender inequality to access, because it all starts with the opportunities that women are presented with, or where they exercise their own agents and say, I really want to have access to, but these are the barriers that are, hindering me from enjoying the right that is enshrined in the Constitution, for example, or the right that is clearly stipulated in policy frameworks. So we need a holistic and a comprehensive approach to gender inequalities if we are to achieve that which we are set to. Because if we limit our analysis or our focus on one thing, then we'll not achieve the set objectives. And that takes us back even to the focus of this study, where we are saying, let's listen to the voices of men so that we leave no stone unturned in our efforts to address and redress the gender inequalities that characterize our societies. I hope I've done justice to your question, Dr. Banda.
Thank you, Prof. Dr. Rosero?
Yeah, I think the questions directed were more or less comments, which I cannot take away everything, because the two contributors, they concur that yes, we cannot run away from the notions of coloniality, but what is more important is what needs to be done. And before we get obsession on coloniality, I wouldn't want to use that word. Or what is it that we are also doing at a local level that is more or less mimicking colonialism, in as much as deprivation and depriving each other is concerned? That's why at the end, I propose the Letema approach, because the Letema approach talks of a collective voluntarily coming together for the common good. So when we voluntarily come together to share, cross-pollinate, access information, that might not necessarily be ours, or information that might not necessarily be mine, but which I am granted access to, I think we tend to benefit more in sharing. We tend to benefit more in sharing. I once had an incident where I was enrolled at both UP and UNISA at some stage. So there was a mix-up. I sent my books that I had borrowed from the library with a colleague. So the colleague took the UNISA books to UP and the UP books to UNISA. The two libraries could have simply done an honorable thing of simply saying, UNISA is just across, these stamps are UNISA. Those at UNISA could have done the same thing to say UP is just across. Imagine, these books had to be sent back. I had to come physically to rectify it. It shows the rate at which there are barriers in terms of our access to knowledge repositories, access to information. So yes, the Letema approach could be the panacea, could be the missing link. Yes, there is the whole idea of saying we don't own data, etc. But we are saying we create the content. Why is it the content is being sold to us? Why is it that there is no an egalitarian trade-off to say you have the platform, I bring the content? Because the content is ours. If Banda produces content which I access, but Facebook is charging me to access it, Facebook is playing middleman, but that middleman is getting more than what Facebook actually deserves. That's where the notions of coloniality, we cannot run away from them. But the whole idea is we have to share. We have to share skills. We have to transfer skills. We have to cross-pollinate. We have to hybrid skills, technology. There are a lot of deficiencies of skills. We can talk of it at gender dynamics, but more importantly, especially in Africa or in Zimbabwe, where I come from, there is also this rural-urban divide. You know, in Zimbabwe, we are grappling with a new curriculum where as a pupil is starting to learn ICT from grade 1 to 7. So in a certain deep rural area where students are still learning under the tree, they have never seen the laptop or imagine what it is like. In the urban area, their counterparts, their fathers, mothers, brothers, sisters, they have laptops, they also have toy iPads, etc. So that's the bottleneck already we are regurgitating. So whenever certain policies of this magnitude are put in place, we normally tend not to have the rural folks, the poor, the marginalized in minds. These have remained urban-centric, very elitist in their nature. That's why I propose an Afrocentric approach of Letsema. But otherwise, thank you for the comments. They are aimed at the betterment of the final product of the paper. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Acero. Before I ask anybody if they have any questions or comments, I will take liberty as the chair to ask my own questions and make my own comments. So the first question I have is for Prof. Batisai. I know that Regina, this is primarily her study, and I hope that we do get to hear her once everything is completely done. But the question I have was whether when she was doing her data collection, whether she's taken into account the men that she was interviewing, whether their views were different, if they were from an urban context, and especially since it was Gauteng, there are a lot of people who live in the peri-urban context who still work in tech. So did she find out whether the views were different? And then in terms of patriarchal views with regards to access to tech, was there a difference when it came to class or a difference when it came to race? And then for Dr. Acero, I really like on an emotional level the Letsema approach. But my question for you is that considering that the creation and proliferation of technology and all forms of technology is actually fundamentally capitalist, and even the university itself you know, the truth is a capitalist institution, no matter where you are. How, on a practical level, how would such an approach actually be implemented? And does anybody have any questions or statements before I go back to the speakers? Any online questions? Okay. All right. Prof. and Dr. Acero, could you please respond? Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much for the question about the discrepancies across the geographical context. So you'll find that this study is work in progress because of ethical considerations and also ethical clearance. So what we decided to do for this particular presentation was to reduce the article to, or rather the presentation and the ultimate article to a conceptual one, because she's yet to do the actual study where she speaks to men. But in terms of a target population and the geographical context, she's targeting technology-based companies that are located in Johannesburg. And examples of such include IT solutions, information and communication systems, and among others. So we do not have the data per se. That's why I didn't get to speak to the findings of the study, but rather speak conceptually to the issues that guided the thinking around the study itself.
Prof. Dr. Acero?
Thank you for the question. I think this international conference, the two-day conference, is actually self-evident of the potential that is there in harnessing skills, in harnessing the multidisciplinary approach, because you are coming from a background where the engineers, where the sociologists, the political scientists, the decolonialists, etc., they are actually coming together to share and cross-pollinate knowledge. I think that's the Letema approach. The Letema approach obviously starts at a micro level. We have to do, for example, mapping of saying how many institutions of higher learning do we have in Gauteng province? Are we sharing our resources in terms of access and sharing in terms of databases, in terms of our repositories, in terms of our archives, because everything has gone digital and everything has gone virtual. Am I able to do a virtual tour? I am sitting at University of Johannesburg. Can I do a virtual tour of information resources at the University of Limpopo? So the moment we succeed at a micro level, we are likely to succeed at a macro. The moment we still operate in silos, creating barriers of ourselves, the moment we still have a university approach as opposed to a multiversity, the moment we still have a four-walled classroom approach instead of a big one-world university in the streets, under the trees, I think that's when we can only realize that the university is supposed to be a multiversity or a pluriversity. So if it is a pluriversity, pluralism thrives in sharing, thrives in togetherness, thrives in collective approach and collective effort. The whole idea is we have to start at a micro level, sharing and accessing resources equally, regardless of who is the owner and who is not the owner, because the common denominator is that at any given turn, we are the creators of the content that we would then start to segregate each other in terms of accessing and sharing. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Acero. Are there any questions or comments? Okay, so I'm going to, again, take liberty as chair and ask both our presenters to give us parting shots as we close off this session for today. We'll start with Dr. Acero, and then we'll go to Prof. Batisai.
Thank you. My own parting ways is that Letema approach to digital or big data sharing, accessing is the panacea in as much as bridging the divide that exists between the data haves and the data have-nots is a reality in our societies. We have to collectively come together as academics, as institutions of higher learning. We have a lot to teach the world how it is done. And as I have said in my presentation, South Africa is a little bit geared up, because this is now happening in most of South Africa's higher education institutions. The notions of sharing resources, databases, access. This is a model that Southern Africa and the rest of Africa can actually emulate going forward. I thank you for the opportunity. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Prof?
Yes, thank you very much. My closing remarks are really around the inclusion of women in the technology industry, because this is an important approach, because if the sector manages to close the gender gap in areas of representation, inclusion, pay gap, then really we'll start to see gender equality across the board. And this will not only empower women within the context of technology, but rather across different sectors of everyday life, because once we have representation, equal salaries, or maybe I'm being too ambitious when I say equal, but at least think about narrowing the gap between the salaries of men and women within the sector and beyond, then we can start to, imagine the equal opportunities across different sectors in our everyday life. And also in terms of the barriers that women face when entering the ICT sector, we need to explore these barriers and to establish, or rather start to think about ways of ways in which women can be included in the production of existing and new technologies, instead of waiting until the technology is there and we start to think about, oh, how then do we include the women? Rather, let's include women from the word go in terms of, the production of these new technologies, so that they are part and parcel of the change that we are witnessing as part of the 4IR. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prof. So once again, on behalf of the University of Johannesburg, I would like to thank the presenters for their illuminating discussions this afternoon. And I'd like to thank the people who joined us virtually, and as well as the people who joined us in person. We're closing off. Thank you. And the publications for this conference will be coming out hopefully mid-2023. And until next year, have a good afternoon.
The University of Johannesburg, the future reimagined.